Long time ago, I was stole, put upon a market, I was sold, put me in the tropics, now I wear slave clothes. This was my future, an endless road. But I'm a rough diamond stuck in coal, wooden spoon in a silver bowl, and exist in peace, given a different role. But we are too strong, can't fit another mold. So I will not fear or throw mud, not be consumed by hate, holding a grudge, unable to develop. Yes, I would be stuck, a hole in all hope, running out of luck. So fire burn, them I feel it, them drilling on my mind, try to steal it, them destroy what I'm healing. Bye bye Babylon, I'm leaving, cause them want to know why had road so long, and it's so easy to do wrong. How the wise get so strong, and where this energy goes when it's gone away. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Jürgen Gario, Caribbean poet and songwriter. He's part of the Poetry Circle Nowhere, which is a performance poetry collective here, based here in Amsterdam. And he'll be back at the end of this program. Thank you very much, Jürgen. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Bali. I am Aldit Hunkar, global freestyle multimedia journalist, and I am your host this evening. In October, culture in the Netherlands is marked by Black talent and the recognition of Black heroes in the fields of arts and culture, but also science and healthcare and even architecture. Black Achievement Month focuses on Black consciousness and achievements, not only the history of the transatlantic slave trade, the 400 years of slavery that ensued, and their legacy, but mainly events before that happened and the events happening now. So today is a special evening on Black identity in Europe specifically, on a continent with so many cultures and nationalities and identities. What, if anything, ties Black Europeans together? What should we focus on? And how can we connect history to the present? It's our honor and pleasure that world-famous writer and journalist Rokhaya Diallo is here with us tonight. Welcome, Rokhaya. She has written several books on being Black in France and what that concept means for home and belonging, your feeling about that. So she will address you later, and I will talk with her in search of a European discourse on Black identity. But there's another guest with us tonight. His name is Francio Guadalupe. He's a social and cultural anthropologist and development sociologist at the University of Amsterdam. And he will share his thoughts on the concept of Afropeanism and share his 2 cents about what it means to be Black in Europe in this day and age. So please give him a very warm welcome. Francio Guadalupe.
There we are. You can hear me? Good evening, everyone. Can we start the PowerPoint? Let me thank the organization for inviting me to speak at this event. I will be talking about the question of Afro-European identity. Is it a question of identity politics, or is it something else? Later on, Rokhaya will be speaking about the question of Blackness, and perhaps we can find some synergy between the two of these things. Now, to speak about Afro-European identity is to speak about the imaginations of community that underlie that term. And those imaginations of community have to do with whenever you have subjugated people and you see those subjugated people are busy looking for a new label, it's because they're in a quest for justice. That's what it's about. 9 out of the 10 times, the moment they want a new label is because the older labels are labels which they suffer from, and therefore they want a new one. That is important to recognize. So therefore, while speaking about the imaginations of community underlying that label, we should also speak about, I hope you can chime in, speak about the question that's motivating this label. And that's the question of racism. And I think later on we should speak about that as well. So let's start. Next slide, sorry. Yeah. So here's the breakdown of it. I would like to start by speaking about the common sense, the general idea that we have when we speak about Afro-Europeans. Then I'd like to talk about the Afro within Afro-Europeans. Let's break it down and see what that's all about. Then we can go to one of the versions of Afro-Europeanness, and then we can go to the second version. The first version is a version that's closer to the common sense. The second version is a version that you usually don't think about, but it's possible logically when you think about Afro-Europeanness. Then we'll talk about the radical implications of of that version, and then we'll talk about that enduring question. So that's the breakdown of the intervention today. Is that clear? Let's go to the following slide. This is the common sense. I think that when people think about Afro-Europeans, this is the image that they get. It's important to recognize that common sense means self-evident truths, but it's not self-evident truths that you arrive at through critical reflection. It's a self-evident truth that you just simply take on board. Now, what I'd like to do, I think you know all these figures from Gloria Wecker to Frank Rijkaard to Amma Sante to Jürgen, who actually just performed here. What I'd like to do is to interrogate that common sense. I think it's important that we interrogate it and we don't take it for granted. What is this self-evident truth that we're talking about when we think, okay, Afro-Europeans, that's people who look like these people? Next slide. So we would have to ask ourselves, from whence comes the Afro in Afro-Europeans? And the Afro doesn't have to do with the hair. It has to do with the hair and a wink towards geography. And to understand Afro-Europeanness, to understand the Afro, you have to actually go to the other side of the Atlantic. You have to go to the Americas, because that's where that term originated. Next slide. So the Afro comes from Afro-Americans, it comes from Afro-Caribbeans, and it comes from Afro-Latinos. What it meant was people born in the Caribbean with a relation to Africa, Afro-Caribbeans, or Afro-Americans, people born in America with a relation to Africa. Mind you, it says a relation to, it doesn't say these people are Africans. Why doesn't the Afro say so? Now, one of the reasons is that many Caribbean thinkers have said you have to take seriously the ships. It was in the ships that a new people were born. All that horror that took place in the ships, that forged something new amongst all those people being transported that didn't understand each other's languages necessarily. They arrived in a new world. They arrived on plantations, and after a while, they became a new people. They embraced the islands, they embraced the country, and they became the Afro people that we speak about. Therefore, they're not necessarily Africans, they're Afro-European or Afro-Caribbean people or Afro-American people or Afro-Cubano. Afro-Cubano emerged already in the 1800s as a term in which they said, we are a different people. We are something else. And as something else, we demand a certain amount of respect. That's where the Afro is coming from. Now, next slide. Of course, what you see is that a change began to happen. That change became more dominant in the United States of America. There they said, instead of Afro-American, we'll call ourselves African-American in the 1960s. But primarily in the 80s with Jesse Jackson. There's where the term really took off, in which he said, no, we are African people living in the Americas. We're African Americans. That became a dominant term. But what you noticed is that it ran into complications. What were those complications? The complications were that in the 90s, a whole lot of persons from the African continent started to migrate to America, to the United States of America. The moment they migrated en masse, then the question was, are they also African Americans? Then you notice the complication happened that they said, no, they're not exactly us. One had to recognize that those 500 years of history meant something. So what you got were a series of new terms. One new term is called the ADOs. It's just emerged in the, I think 2012 or so it emerged. The ADOs, they would say, we are Americans descended of slaves. So we're not the same as those people coming now from Africa. There was also a distinction that is now being made between Caribbean Americans, persons that came from the island, and the African Americans. So even in trying to create this unified term, the complications happened anyhow. Still, you see that there is an attempt to unify all of this. When you take that term as an African American and say, we're unifying all those persons, you get this. Next slide. This is the version that we now have, I think that's becoming hegemonic in the Netherlands. It's the African American modeled version. When you have that, then all these people will be Afro-European in that sense. But if you're going to be critical about the common sense, you have to ask yourself, what exactly does someone like Jerry Afrier, that is a strong proponent of the kick-out Black Peter, what exactly does he have in common with someone like Quincy Gario? You have to ask yourself that question if you're going to bunch them together. It's not history that they share, because Quincy's history would be a history of the plantation, slavery in the Caribbean, whilst the history of Jerry is a history of Ghana. If you want to bring them together and say, well, Jerry is African, Quincy is someone of African descent, then the question you have to ask yourself is, why do you draw the boundary that way? If you're talking about Africans, then you would ask yourself, why don't I put someone of Moroccan descent here, or someone of Egyptian descent? For they too are from the continent. So what exactly are we creating when we take the American model? We would have to ask ourselves, what is the basis? If it is a racial bond, then perhaps, I was just speaking to Rokai about Maryse Condé. Maryse Condé would say, then you're just simply using the European racial terms. So you would have to critically ask yourself, what exactly are you doing? That was her critique of negritude. It was important, but it stayed too much in the playing field of Europe. It played too much the racial game, and perhaps we have to ask ourselves today, with this hegemonic model, whether we're playing the racial game or not in this. If we actually want to go broader, we would actually have to ask ourselves and go back to the original conception of the thing. And the original conception was only to say, persons living here with a relation to there. If we're going to do that, then we might have to shift the geography from the Americas to this place. Next slide. To Africa. If we shift it to Africa and we say, when we speak about Afro-Europeans, we're speaking about people living in Europe with a relation to Africa. That's what we're speaking about. If we say that, then the Afro-Europeans on this model would look like this. Next slide. These would be your Afro-Europeans. If you take an African-centric view, then you would say, just like in the Caribbean where they say it was geography, these are the geographical persons. Then you would have to say, within the category of Afro-Europeans, we would have people of Moroccan descent. We would also have people from Somali. We would have people, even people with an Afrikaner background, because they too are people living here with a relation to Africa. If we take the African-centered model, if we take the American-centered model, many of these are out. We take the African-centered model, they're in. Next slide. You would ask yourself, what about these persons? What about Jürgen Reimann? What about Miluszka Meulens? What about them? Because then they're not in that model. Where do you place them? And I understand that in the Black Achievement Month, we're actually busy celebrating primarily, I think, the first version. But where would you place these people if you're not going to place them in that model? I think there is a place to place them if you actually recognize, again, geography. Next slide. These persons have a link to this area, to the Caribbean. That's really where either they were born or where their parents or grandparents were born, or great-grandparents. That's about as far as you can go. If that is the case, then you have a term for them. And this is the term. They're Caribbean Europeans. They're persons living in Europe who are related to the Caribbean. And they share with many other persons of Caribbean descent living here in Europe at this moment in time. That's where I think you would place them, and it would be a logical place to place them if you actually continue the tradition of thinking Afro-Caribbeanness. But in placing them there, and I'm almost finished, in placing them there, you would actually then have to recognize the radical implications of that. For whether you call yourself Indo-Caribbean, and that would simply mean you're from the Caribbean with a relationship to India, or Sino-Caribbean, you're from the Caribbean with a relationship to China, that doesn't say anything about your culture. It doesn't say anything about your lifestyle. And in the Caribbean, we know all these persons actually share in culture. It is the question of creolization. In that sharing of culture means that the terms you use are not that important. What is important? Because I can see you and say, yeah, he's Afro-Caribbean like myself, or she's Afro-Caribbean like myself. But that doesn't tell me a whole lot. I still need to find out who you are, what you like, and oftentimes you might not like what I like. If you take the Caribbean as a model and recognize that these regions were the oldest colonies, 500 years, and that they actually shaped Europe, it's the old idea of Fanon, Europe is a creation of the third world. That's why a Jamaican sociologist, when he was asked, who are you? He said, I'm the sugar in your coffee. Other people are your coffee, they're your tea. You cannot be European without me. That's the radical implication of saying, hey, people, we're Caribbean Europeans. And that means we would have to break a lot of the stale categories that we use. It would not mean that people are immigrants here. No, this place has been open like every other place, and it was shaped by that creolization movement. That means, last slide, everyone would be actually Creole Europeans. You would not have these stale terms like autochtone and allochtone, because that's based on blood and soil, whilst creolization is based on culture, cultural mixing, cultural becoming. So you don't necessarily need those terms. Everyone bears some relation culturally to everyone else. But there's still a point that we have to discuss. It is this. It is the elephant in the room. It is why this quest is taking place. So we would still have to deal with the question of racism and ask ourselves, how are we going to combat anti-black racism without recourse to the racial categories of version 1, the African-American model, without saying people share something which is not history nor geography, but something. So I would like us to have a conversation about that, about how do we do anti-racist work without using race. Acknowledging racism, acknowledging the power of race, but saying we're not going to use race to actually do our anti-racist work. I hope we can have a conversation about that. Thank you.
Either chair, Francio, thank you very much. That was really thought-provoking. I think it's time to invite Rokhaya Diallo on stage. Rokhaya, please come here. Give her a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. So you just about turned everything upside down now for us. Maybe, Rokhaya, you would like a quick reaction to Francio's story.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. First of all,
Please pull it to you.
is it nice? Is it fine here? First of all, I'm really happy, really glad to be here and to have that transnational conversation about being black, even if it's a category that should be questioned. I think that what unites people who are seen as black people is the experience of being seen as black people and treated as black people in Europe. Like, you have people that have nothing to do culturally, nationally, but they are seen as black people, and it has consequences that are the same. So the connection, to me, the connection between two different black persons in Europe is the treatment that they can have looking for a job, being confronted to the police, or even all the stereotypes that have been created by the long history of slavery and colonization. So maybe it has more to do with experience than really with the culture.
Short reaction?
No, I think
No,
we should
you
open
good?
a conversation.
Okay. Rogaya, let me ask you. When did you first have the feeling that you were born and raised in Paris, in France? When did you first have the feeling that you were not one of them?
It took me some time.
Like most of us, I guess.
Yeah. I was, as you told, I was born and raised in Paris, and I grew up in the northeast of Paris, so it's mixed neighborhood. So it was not really uncommon not to be white. Most of my classmates were from North African, Asian, or African backgrounds. So we were several to have parents who had accents, who were like with very different phenotypes. And actually, the more it was after high school. Actually,
After high school, yes.
As an adult. Yeah. So it took me a very long time. The more I advanced in my study, and the less there were people looking like me. And at some point, I was the only one. I think that many of us have experienced that, to be the only black person or non-white person in a room. And at some point, people started to ask me, "Where are you from?" But in French, it's like "Tu viens d'où?" So it means, where do you come from? Mm-hmm. And to me, I never came to France because I was born there.
Exactly.
So I was like, I come from Paris.
Yes.
And people were not satisfied
But
with
where do you really come from?
And where were you before?
Yeah.
And I was like, there was no before because I was not born before being in Paris. And I understood that people were asking me, they were not really interested in knowing where I was from, but in knowing why I was black. What was the reason of my blackness? So was it my parents? Was it me traveling from another country? And I understood also that my answer wasn't really, they had no real interest in my answer. Like I would say that my family is from Senegal, and someone would say, "Oh, I saw a documentary about Mali yesterday."
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's another country. It has nothing to do. And and it means that they don't care. Like, I could say any country and the answer would be the same. If I said, like, Côte d'Ivoire, they would say that they have seen the same documentary about another country still. So it's more a way to tell you that you don't belong. Right. And at some point, I decided to understand why my country still conceive itself as a white country, which was not true because France is very diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is that realization, is that what brought you to be an activist, which you are?
That, and also watching the news. So two events really moved me and really shifted the way I saw my country. So the first one was in 2004. There was a national debate about the hijab in high school in France. So every day there was a debate on the fact that young girls in high schools, middle schools and high school, wanted to go to school with a hijab, so Muslim girls. And all the debates were hosted by white male, and there were no women and no Muslim women, and they were all debating about how Muslim women should dress to be acceptable in the French Republic.
And to be free.
Yes, to be free, but to be told how to be free,
right.
Even if they chose to wear a hijab.
Yeah.
So it was kind of surprising at some point. The debate led to the ban of the hijab. Mm-hmm. So to me, it was very troubling because if you want to free a woman, to help a woman to be free, you should help her access instruction in school. So how could you help a woman to be free if you tell her not to go to school? So, but the majority of the country was in favor of the ban of the hijab in high school, and it's in the law now, and so you cannot go to a public school with a hijab anymore. Yeah. And the other thing that happens the year after was in 2005. So it was 3 kids who were chased by the police in Clichy-sous-Bois, which is a city in the suburbs of Paris. It's 10 kilometers far from Paris. So they were returning from a football game. They had done nothing wrong, and they saw the police, and they got fear, and they ran because it was during the Ramadan, and in the evening, the Ramadan, you can eat when the sun is down. So I think that the sun was almost down, and they knew that if they got arrested, they wouldn't have been able to eat. So they ran, and at some point they decided to hide in a power station, a power plant, and they stayed there. And they got electrocuted. Okay. So 2 of them died, and the third survived because the bodies of his friends just protected him from the electricity. And they were between 15 and 17. And we know today that there were 15 minutes in which the police could have called the company to cut the electricity, and they didn't. And we have a tape in which we have the voice of one of the police officer who say, if they are inside, they're not going to make it. So after that, uprising started from Clichy-sous-Bois and spread all over France, and the public discourse was very different from what happened. It's always the same routine. So they were accused of being thugs. So, and the minister of Interior, who was then Nicolas Sarkozy, said that if you have done nothing wrong, you have no reason for. Right. Yeah. Right. Yes. So that's and so those riots are really historical, and they decided me to.
Yes. Yeah. This brought you to being an activist.
Exactly.
So Francio, despite the really enthralling analysis that you just shared with us, these are stories that Black people face, whatever you call them. So maybe that's where we should start.
Well,
but you say you don't want to. You want to tackle the racism without talking about blackness.
I think we have to find. No, I didn't say without talking about blackness. I said we have to tackle racism without falling into the trap of race or racial categories,
right?
Or racial belonging. And I think one does so if one recognizes that all identities are political identities.
Except white.
It's also political identity. If you Black can be a category of administration. The colonial administration called a set of people Black and did certain things with them. Black can be a category of the culture industry. It can be a category of commerce. Even if you tell me that's the way you are ascribed, that doesn't make it a political category. You need to change something. You have to actually do something politically. Any political category is a non-essential category. We make the mistake when we do not recognize that for categories to change something, they would have to be political categories.
But is that a question of how you name it, or is it a question of perception? Because these policemen that Rochaya is talking about, they don't care about politics, or do they?
Well, there we go. The persons, I think this example is an example of Blackness as an administrative category with a police behind it to actually administer what they consider control. That's what it is. How are you going to respond to that? And the moment you respond to that is the moment you're in politics.
So how would you respond to that?
I think we should have that conversation.
Yes, I know, I would like you to help us, because it's a new concept for many of us.
I think blackness is a question of political blackness. So we can have similar experiences, but we're individuals, so which means that doesn't unite persons.
Right.
You have to create a category, what Maurice Conde was talking about with negritude. It was a category of politics. After a while, it made a mistake to say, well, we share the same culture. But in the beginning, with Aimé said, it was just a political category. All persons who actually agree on justice in a certain way, they would be part of the negritude movement. It didn't mean all black people, because you had enough other persons who were benefiting from it. Yes. So we should not make the mistake of racializing the thing if we're going to fight anti-racism.
What do you say to that, Ruchaya?
I totally agree. We really need to remember that race is a social construct
Yes.
that can evolve. That even whiteness is invented, like Irish people in the U.S. were not white people until some point, which means that everybody can move from a category to another, and it's connected with a political will. So making people black means being able to exploit them. And you were speaking about racial categories. In France, during the colonization, there was a category of French Muslims.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that that category existed during the colonial time, and that today it's very difficult to be French and Muslim at the same time. People are asked to be French only and to be less and less visibly Muslims.
Because France is officially secular.
Colorblind,
Yes,
and
yeah.
secularism shouldn't mean erasing your culture or your religion, but it's like more the philosophy of universalism.
Yes.
Like we're all the same.
The trouble is that we're talking about this now on an academic level, and it's about definitions and constructs. But I'm really pessimistic, because when I look in the streets, Joe Normal, so to speak, really is not concerned with the fact that this is a construct. Joe Normal is a product of 500 years of colonialism and everything that went with it, and is wired in a certain way as to just look at the outside of people, and what he sees is a skin color. And he bases his whole perception of that person on what he sees. And I'm trying to find out how what you say can bring us further from that, can move us forward, I mean.
I never worry too much about Joe Normal, because I think that if we worry
But there's so many Joe Normals.
Let me explain. If we worry too much about Joe Normals, then we would not be where we are today. People in the Caribbean had to say, I don't care what Joe Normals say. I care what actually I think. I have to create something for myself.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. So if we worry too much about what's going on, we're not busy thinking about, okay, what do we want? And how do we construct something to get what we want?
Okay. Transport that now to Europe, where people who look like us came at a certain point into a society that was predominantly white. In their, in the mouth of the lion, so to speak. How does that translate? Because once you're in the Caribbean or you're in Africa among people who look like you, it's easier to say, we want what we want and we're going to get it. But then when you move into this white world, which is what Europe was, then things are different, or are they not?
Of course they are. Like, if I take the example of my parents, they grew up in a black environment because they were in Senegal. And I think that they discovered that they were black once they came to France.
Yes.
So it's like, and
How many of us recognize that we only realized we were black when we came to Europe? Yeah. In fact, I only realized, not even when I came here, but a couple of years ago maybe. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, but it means that you have a very different way of building your self-esteem, because
Yes.
you live in a country where the president is black, where judges and doctors are black. So you have examples of people that you can reflect on and that can be models to you. Mm-hmm. And I have a very different experience with France from my parents, because I grew up as a minority. I never saw myself in TV, in the magazines. And at the same time, I grew up with the promise of the Republic, the French Republic, that would say, okay, you're the same as the others. And I found out as an adult that it was not the case. So it's interesting how in the same family you can have different expectations from the country you live in, because my parents experienced France as foreigners, so they wouldn't be...
They were newcomers?
Yes, so they wouldn't be as demanding with the country as I would be, because I was thinking that...
I think that's a crucial point that
Yes,
you're
it's
making.
different. Yeah, it's
Yes.
very different, because
Yeah.
to me, I got the same premises as every other French person.
Yes.
And I found out that I was not the average French person.
So what does this make us here in Europe? What is the context we are in now? Either of you.
What do you mean by
Well,
that?
what is it we're actually dealing with now today? Because you're saying, which
Yes.
is true, our parents had a different perception of being in Europe than we do. What is the context that we find ourselves in now?
I think that Europe is just discovering its face because we've been here for some time, and all the narrative that has been built by the cinema, by the fictions on TV, was not really realistic, and
Hollywood never is.
Yes, yes, and even like if you like French movies, you never see someone like me, and if you see someone looking like me, it would be an undocumented undocumented person,
Or somebody's maid.
a nurse, a maid or a prostitute. Like those people exist, but there is a wide range of black people, Asian people, or even Arab people that are never really seen in screen. So that means that people of color who are pushing to be equal, to have their right respected, are just forcing the European nation to face who they are really.
They themselves, but also the people who were here before, so to speak. So how difficult is that part?
Well, of course, this is going to take
What?
time.
Don't tell me 300 years.
No, it's going to take time. It's going to take time for it to gain space and to recognize the transformation that took place, that is taking place right now in Europe. That is surely the case. What I think is also of consequence is to recognize the neighborhoods. Remember when I came to the Netherlands, the neighborhood where I lived, you had persons of Dutch, Moroccan, Turkish, Surinamese, Moluccan background. That was a nurturing place. We should not forget that. That actually fortified me and many other persons to actually go out and fight.
How?
In the sense that in those neighborhoods, you never felt, I'm not the norm. I am the norm. And if you go to school and you come back at home, you are the norm. And if the television had particular, let's say, it didn't have faces that resembled my face, in those neighborhoods, parties were constructed, music was made, a trans culture emerged, the whole urban scene that we now have in the Netherlands, that emerged in those neighborhoods. That means that I had other role models of beauty, other role models of manliness, other role models of femininity. Those things matter. And then later on, it transposes itself, and therefore those persons then fight to say, I want my rights in the wider society. But that nurturing environment should not be simply overlooked or forgotten to only speak about the other side of society. The hidden side matters too. It's what fortified us from in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in Africa, and now here in Europe. So let's remember that.
Yes, and it's brought us to a place where there are people like us in Europe.
Sitting here, yeah.
People who actually have an education, who actually know how to speak two sentences together.
Yeah.
Or who win the World Cup. I just want to mention that.
Say that again?
Or who win the World Cup of football.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I just I
Exactly.
think it's important.
So we are now in a time, at least in the Netherlands, and I'm sure France has the same problem. We are in a time that we are speaking up now. We are demanding our space. We are demanding our place in society, and that is causing some trouble left and right. How do we go about that? Is that something that we should work on together, or is there this difference that you showed us between being a Caribbean European and being an African European? Should we? Is this one? What is this?
Well, you could politically organize. I think that it is not so that only now are we speaking up. When I wrote that book that's coming out next year, I actually interviewed many persons of Surinamese descent who in the late 70s, early 80s, organized together with persons of Moluccan descent, persons of Turkish Moroccan descent to fight for their rights. We forget that older generation. That older generation also fought to create something. And they had other political categories, categories of solidarity across. So perhaps when we think again, we might actually ask ourselves, what did they do? What did they do to actually remind me that what was taking place with the Moluccan persons was also my issue? And to teach those Moluccan kids that, hey, listen, the issue taking place amongst the Surinamese and Antillians, that's also your issue.
It's right.
What did they do, and what are we now forgetting nowadays. So we have to ask ourselves
Well,
those
try
questions.
answering that question yourself.
I think that we're forgetting that there is a history of revolt in this country, a history of social movements, and perhaps we have to unearth that history to actually do the fight again today.
And what would that bring us, apart from knowing, you know, the
would bring-
roots? The roots are an important thing. If you don't know your past, you can't know your future.
Yeah.
But what would that bring society as a whole? And I'm now including
Yeah.
the white part of society.
Of course, yeah.
Because unless we want to carry on being two camps, which I don't think we should.
Yeah, we were never two camps because...
But we are.
Let me explain what I mean. Because if you, I don't like the term, but so let me not use the term intersectionality, I used it, but if you actually take class into account, in those neighborhoods you had many white Dutch persons living. They also were part of that new culture that was emerging. Sometimes some of them were racist, but not all the time many of them were racist. And they were part of that whole revolution taking place. Let us not forget that and act as though there were two camps. There were not two camps. If there were two camps, there was a camp of people who were being stomped on.
And people who were stomping.
And people who were stomping.
Okay.
And in the camp, those persons that were being stomped on, that was a multicolored ensemble, a multicultural ensemble, and in that, there were political organizations taking place.
So now I'm starting to see what you mean when you say this is not about race per se, it's about class.
Also, yeah,
Also.
to a large extent, yeah. Yeah, yes.
Yes. What do you say to that?
I agree class is very essential, but I also think that if you are privileged and you're not exposed to racism because you belong to a category that is not, you know, constructed as inferior, you need to acknowledge your privilege, which means that even if yourself consider that you are a good person, if someone is discriminated against, you may take advantage from the discrimination, meaning that if some Black, Arab, Asian person doesn't get an apartment, it means that a white person will get it. And whoever the white person is, even if it's an anti-racist activist, there is that privilege that needs to be acknowledged. So it means that it's not related to your personal will, but to your social position. So it means that you can, if you don't understand that you have that privilege and that you can just act, knowing that, you cannot really be part of the struggle of the fight, and it's something that is very difficult to understand, because if you speak about privilege, people would say, yeah, but I'm poor, or I suffer from this or that. Mm-hmm. But if you take two persons who are in the same socio-economic condition, if one is Black and one is not, mm-hmm. You add class to race, and it's not the exact same condition or position.
Meanwhile, the stompers are laughing and stomping away, mm-hmm. and actually dividing two people with two groups, mm-hmm. who are actually one group. That's quite clever. We should learn from that, mm-hmm. and turn it around. I would like to know if there's any comments from the room at this point. Questions or comments? Yes, Yusin, thank you.
I was really impressed by Francois' presentation, which did not really surprise me, knowing who he is. But I would like to come back to his distinction between culture and race, and especially his celebration of the so-called Creole culture. I just want to remind you that culture has become a critical mode for reinventing new form of racism without race. People are now being discriminated, not on the basis on their race or color, but the kind of culture they are related to by a dominant discourse that produce two categories or two types of culture: the inside culture, the culture of the mainstream or the dominant group, and the peripheral or subaltern culture. And the Creole culture was the product or the byproduct of the plantation that was created to distinguish the mainstream white culture from the so-called uncivilized black culture for this newly emerging, the French would say the évolué, that is the civilized black people
Yes.
who have more or less acquired this so-called civilized culture.
So what is the point you're trying to make with
So
this?
the point I like to make here is we should be cautious about the policy of identification that can lead to an identity policy. Because by celebrating these different identity identification, we think to replace a new category, a hegemonic white category by another category, call it Afro-Caribbean or Afro-American and so on.
I'm going to
For
ask
me,
Francio
just
to respond to that.
To concrete,
Yes.
for me, the fight should be about citizenship.
Citizenship. Okay, I'm going to ask.
The
Thank
right
you.
as a citizen,
Thank you very much.
not
I'm
as-
going to ask Francio to respond. Thank you very much.
Well, you've said a lot. I don't know if I can respond to all of it, but the last point I agree on. Citizenship is a banner around which one should fight, not only formal but substantive citizenship, I would say. And secondly, I recognize that culture can be used, can be a handmaiden of racism, as to saying, but I think that's only possible when culture is tied to the body. That's why I like this whole notion of race as a social construct, but oftentimes, as I've argued, it goes back to the body. So we must think culture not in terms of bodies. And if you can think culture not in terms of bodies, then you're out of the racial game. The Creole culture
what does
doesn't
that
belong
bring
to...
you? I mean, how does that manifest when you do that? When you take culture away from the body?
When you take cultures out of the bodies, you can say, the reason why you actually are very good in this dance hall doesn't have to do with your body. It has to do with that you've practiced. It has to do that you're part of this. You understand the vibes. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
You can learn it. But when culture is tied to a body, we say you can't learn it because you don't have the right body.
Ah, okay. That's what I'm going to really use next time somebody says, you people dance so well. Yes, we do, but you could learn it too. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Anybody else in the room? Right here. Hey, that's another Rogaya.
So my question is to Rogaya, same name. I was wondering when you found out, when you realized that when you were the only black person and people were seeing you differently, did that do something with your relationship to the others around you?
So did it affect my relationship to the others?
Yeah. Also when you started to become an activist.
My work as an activist really had an effect on how people understood who I was, because when you are a minority and you make it, you're supposed to be grateful. So not to say that anything is wrong. And I can, even now as a journalist, when I'm on a debate, because I work mostly on TV and radio, like on a debate, I'm perceived as the one who is just, the disturbing piece, because
We know people like that in the Netherlands. Yes.
you should be happy to be here. We welcome you. You're around the
You
table.
should be thankful for the
Yes.
chances we've given you.
Yes. Why are you complaining? You're okay, but I'm not the only one, and my position is not representative of the one of millions of other black people who are in France. So, but it's okay because it helps you just to identify who are your allies and who are not.
But did that mean that you drastically cleaned your contact list on your telephone at that time?
Not from close friends.
Not from close friends. but those remain. Is that an answer to your question? Yes. Yeah.
I also like to follow up.
Yeah, where's the mic? Yeah.
I was also interested in the follow-up you add, because well, I don't know how to ask it myself, but does it also mean that you don't have like a lot of white friends anymore?
Not really, because I used to have like close friends that I had in school who are still my friends, but like in professionally, it's sometimes it's difficult, and like in the public sphere, because I have a public job, I'm constantly labeled anti-white, and it's weird. It's weird, but I hear that a lot. So people who know me, white or not, they don't really care. But to people who may work with me, it can be a barrier.
But you do also make some new white people along the way.
Yes, because
we shouldn't forget
I have,
that.
I have a podcast on race with a friend of mine whose name is Grassley. She's from Chinese, Cambodian, French background. So we speak about being women of color in France. And a large part of our audience is white, actually. So many of them come to us to say thank you, because we want to be involved, but we don't know what to do, and we don't really understand what it means not to be white. So listening to you, to your experiences, and to your guests help us understand and help us to know how to position ourselves. So it means that people who don't want to interact with me, I don't think that I lose a lot.
Thank you. Gotcha? Yeah. Who else? This side, please. Oh, you see, I'm making you do all the walking. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In this kind of discussion, I always have a lot of questions and comments, but I will choose just one. It's related to timelines, but also to societal changes that Francis was mentioning. Well, in Europe, there is a deep racism which is difficult to deal with. You see it every day if you are someone like me. In the US, for example, you have racism which is clear and they live it, but they do have the other opportunities based on the political system maybe. So my question looks at me and my children. I'm raising 2 small children. They'll be called black every day, whether they are still small or they grow. But I think often about the opportunity when they grow up. If they're in the US, it will be a different life. Here, it will be a different life. So if I take them to the city, they don't see often black stars in Europe. They don't see often black politicians in Europe. I don't see a king being black or minister being black often in Europe. So do you think, for example, what happened in US in the last, let's say, 50 years after Martin Luther King, do you see that happening anytime soon in Europe, that I can hope that my kid, for example, will hope to be easily a leading politician in a European nation?
Who are you asking?
Both.
Both. Let's start with Francio. There you go. That's you solved this one, Francio. Yes.
Look, here I think specificities matter. The American civil rights movement, its culmination was actually to say, I think it was Lyndon Johnson who said, we have to construct now a black middle class. And from the 1960s to now, the upper middle class, the upper black middle class has 3 times as much, sorry. I'm losing my, they've tripled. Yeah. So but that does not mean that there's not a large African-American underclass. So that has grown, but that was a particular politics of diversity. We will diversify the elites. It almost resembled Du Bois' talented tent idea. That's what took place in the United States of America. We have to ask ourselves whether we want something like that, because diversifying the elite does not necessarily mean that the mass is going to move with you.
Because the diversified elite will still be the elite and will have to all work according to the elite code.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to ask yourself whether you would like that.
And would you like that?
Actually, now then you kind of provoke another question.
Yeah. Well, you came
myself.
with it.
I'm looking for tools to equip my children to deal with that society which will be changing at a pace that will not be able to control.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about, let's say now they finish primary school, I'm kind of helping them to find secondary school, university, and there. But I'm also trying to tell them, do not be passive, because where I come from, where I grew up with ethnic violence and stuff. Then you go to Europe, you are hoping that there's no ethnic violence, but you have to deal with some racism, which is very difficult. So I have to be aggressive every day, even now.
When you say aggressive, what do you mean?
Not aggressive in a violent way. I mean, aggressive towards the system. But I also don't want my children to grow up with this anger against the society. I want them to kind of enjoy being human, to look at society and trust people.
Yes.
I don't want them to be like me. I often walk on the street and wonder who's my friend, who's a potential enemy. So I want them to have kind of different look at society.
I understand, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if any of the participants or the speakers...
I'm sure everybody feels
if
what
there
you're
is,
saying.
If there's someone who can maybe share a little bit of tools that you use when you are talking to your grown child,
Yeah.
and you are kind of not really wanting them to be that angry
I understand.
but at the same time, not wanting them, you don't want them to sit back and think that society will solve all those issues for them.
So who has an answer? What kind of tools can we give children so that they don't live the life that the struggles? That's what you're saying. You want your children to have a normal life without the struggles and the anger that goes with it.
So I have not lived that long. However, I can personally say it's all about communication. Make sure that when your children start to grow up, that when they see things, they understand what is happening. And things may not always stay the same. Things may change, but if things stay the same, then they need to understand why, the possible ramifications of why it is staying or why it could possibly change. It's all about communication and structuring their mindset as to thinking well above the majority.
So what specifically do you tell them? Because you're saying it's about, sorry, I forget the word you used, but I want an example, please.
Can I get a topic? Because it depends on the topic. Everything will not be the same depending on what you're talking about.
Yes, but our distinguished gentleman tells me he walks the streets looking over his shoulder, where's the enemy, where's the friend? What can you tell a child about that?
What age is the child?
8 years old.
Stay aware, but see, that's
Okay, you give it a little think. The gentleman next to you has. I hope you have something concrete to share with us. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please stand up.
pressure.
Thanks. Yeah, we soon come. Yeah.
Yeah. What I tell my son is what I
Please use the mic. That's
feel
what it's
myself
for. Yes.
very strongly. That all these matters we're talking about, it's what I heard you two say. It's not about color. It's about culture. It's about identity, and identity is what you think you are, right? Do we agree on that? Okay. What I think I am much more than what I think I am. And I tell my son that I have a cosmic identity which is not limited to any earthly location. Yeah? We are from the stars, we are not from Earth in that sense. So all this color, race, and cultural thing, it's all confined to earthly location, right?
Yes.
Does
Your
it
son
make
is how
any
old?
sense?
Your son is how old?
By now he's 17, but I told him
Okay.
much earlier already.
Right. So how did his classmates react to your son when he was 8, and how did he deal with whatever happened to him at that age?
Well, he kind of felt very, I think he felt very united with his classmates. He was of color and most of his classmates were white. I also grew up in a very white rural society where I and me and my sister were the only of color people. And by then I didn't notice I was black, even though when I looked in the mirror I saw I was black. Only later I found out I was black when I moved to Amsterdam, and in the urban situation I found out that my white friends didn't sometimes recognize me when I was working with black friends that I met only then, right? So then I kind of got my own identity issues a little bit because I was still the same person like the person I was when I was still living in a small village.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it's always
That's one
that's
thing.
my
The
point.
lady here in front, please. She's been raising her hand. Thank you.
Hi, hello. I'm a teacher at an international school in Amstelveen. I teach between the ages of 4 to 12. So my advice to you is I have a class, well, first of all, I'm the only black teacher at my school. So my day-to-day thing is, may I please speak to the teacher? I'm like, it's me. No, like the teacher.
Who says this to you?
Visitors to the school. And they often think I'm the cleaner.
Of
So
course,
let's
you're
put
the
that on the
janitor.
table.
Yes, yes.
So, and I have a class full of mixed children. One thing I normally do is that I order color pencils of skin color. I order children to play with of skin color. So I have an Asian baby in the center. I have an Indian baby. I have a black baby. And recently, a child said, oh, we should cut this black baby's hair. It's ugly. And you should cut your hair too, Yeflina. And I'm like, lesson time, wait a minute. So I had to go and buy a mirror. And it's so interesting at the age of 4 and going forward that they do not take the time to look at themselves in the mirror and understand that it's okay to be different. Put aside the race. You know, I have Indian children who are teased just because of the scent of their food. So I think as a parent, it's important for them to feel so grounded in who they are that despite the factors that come their way from 4 to 5, that they can be like, it's okay. Because I teach my children in the class, whether my parents agree or not, we tend to argue every day that it's okay, it's fine, I love my hair, I love the scent of my food. It's those little things that when you instill it at such a young age, by the time they get older, no matter what society they're placed in or environment, they're so concrete and grounded in who they are. And that's why I have so many mirrors in my classroom. And when they need to color themselves, they're not like, but we only have yellow. And it's true. And my partner and I just also went to a refugee camp. And the lady was so upset with me because I walked into the classroom and I was like, I don't see myself. And it's so important as children, I agree, even if they're the only black child in that classroom, as an educator, and because we know what is going on, that a child must walk into that classroom and not want to be this person or that person, but look in the mirror and be like, hello, and I want to be me.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's very crucial right now, because we are going to go in classes and we are going to go in situations where we might be the minority or the majority. Mm-hmm. But the important thing I can tell you, because I'm a teacher, I have no kids, but I have 30 kids. But I mean,
Yeah, I'm like you.
is
Yes.
that having a mirror in their classroom. Every morning they sit in a circle and they must tell me, what do you love about yourself? And little things, how do you feel today? I feel sad because I didn't want to bring my tikka masala because she teased me. And how did that make you feel? Sad. And I go to the other person, do you think it's okay that that comment made your friend sad? Those type of dialogues is just the little things that I think are crucial for just a child to be so grounded in who they are. That is what I can give you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think it's interesting that you talk about children from between 4 and...
Yeah, right
Yes.
now I go in between classes
Yes.
and
I-
there was a 4-year-old boy who wanted to cut my hair and I was like,
Okay, but we need to address this little 4-year-old boy because we've all seen the doll test, right? We know, everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say the doll test. Little children, I believe 4 years old, you know, they are confronted with 2 dolls, a white doll and a black doll, and they are asked questions. Who is the nice doll? And it's always the white one. Who's the ugly doll? It's always the black. That's 4-year-old children. Where does it come from? How do we get rid of it? Because that's half of the problem.
It comes from the culture. We need to understand that racism is cultural. It's not something that you...
How can you instill this in a 4-year-old? Where does that come from?
From everywhere, from the TV, from what they hear in school, from some educators. As a children, I've been exposed to comments from teachers who would, I don't remember exactly, but I've heard many things in school.
Like you have to wash your hair when it was just washed.
Like even small things, like when it was hot, I was hot, and teacher would tell me, "You must be used to,
Yes,
to heat."
Yes.
No, I was born in Paris, so I'm not used. And I've heard that like small comments to other kids who were from Vietnamese background. So it's something that comes even from other kids, but they hear that from adults, from their parents. So to deconstruct that, we need also to have in curriculums history lessons that includes everyone, like women, for example, but also people of color, like why we're here. It's because of history of colonization, so having heroes who have different faces also help to, people who look like them to just say, okay, we've part of the history.
Yes, we should be teaching them in school what you were saying, that it is us who give Europe its face. You said it better than I'm saying it now. Tell me again how you said
I
it.
can't remember how I said it. But,
You said it quite brilliantly.
Yeah. I really loved what she just said.
Yeah.
That makes the University of St. Martin proud. She's a student of the University of St. Martin. She really makes it proud. You say the Caribbean universities do wonderful stuff when you have students coming out producing this. And now back to your question.
The question being that it is.
Yeah.
If it's in the youngest of the youngest, it's in there. They don't even know it's there, but it is.
Yeah.
How do we address it? How do we get rid of it?
Well, I think it's banal, but part of it is education. Part of it is there is a space and a place for representational politics, so you can have a wide palette of difference. Kids have to grow up understanding difference. But I think also there's a space for us to reorganize our senses. Colonialism, to me, was based upon the hegemony of the visual.
You mean the outside?
Of the visual,
yes.
Exactly, how you look. Whilst we survived based upon a struggle of touch, of movement.
Yes.
The reason why I can look at a person that looks like me and say, she is beautiful, it's because my mother danced a certain way. Yeah. She moved a certain way. There was a touch in that. That is the counter narrative, if you wish, that we have to push forward. How do we look at each other in terms of movement and touch? How do we reorganize this society in which we can push those things to the foreground? Reorganize, so it's not about moving one particular image of visual beauty for another image.
No.
It's about breaking
it's
those
about
images.
The fluidity of possibilities.
Yeah.
How do we get there? What is the challenge? What are the challenges we're up against in Netherlands, in Europe as a whole?
I think I think there's challenges and there's opportunities. There's opportunities in that you see there's a growing cultural production by persons from the Caribbean, Moroccan, Turkish, Algerian descent that's emerging. We have to intervene in that as persons who want to do intellectual work and activist work to try and mold that to a certain direction. We have to try and do that. And we have to use the spaces that are granted now, because you have persons granted, which we've also created, persons in universities, persons in schools, persons working in the media, persons working in banks. There we are ambassadors of other type of being together. And as ambassadors of that other type of being together, every day we have to do that work. And those ambassadors are persons of all various colors that are doing that work. Because I see someone sitting there who's Jaap Zwart, who grew up on Curaçao, did the work in Curaçao, and did the work here. People will look at him and say, oh, you're a white man. No, he did the work because he was part of a culture of emancipation. So we have to recognize a culture of emancipation that emerged out of the crucibles of slavery and genocide of Amerindians and so forth, but everyone can belong to that culture.
Does that apply to the entire of Europe, or to the whole of Europe, what he says? Is this where we should be heading?
Of course, I think that the culture of resistance is something that is really widely shared, and we've spoken about race, kind of, and class, but also gender is also part of it.
Yes.
So we need to take that into account and to make sure that all the forces of resistances go together.
And is that happening enough, in your view?
Not enough, but it's happening.
It's happening. Is there like an acceleration even?
Yes, I think that social media forced the mainstream media to take into account voices that were not, because you cannot, act if some people didn't exist anymore, because they would, create hashtags that would trend. And it's like, I've seen that in my profession, that it's very difficult to ignore people that make noise online.
True. True. Especially if it's a big noise.
Yes.
So, on a whole, do you think these are optimistic times? I'm asking very carefully. Are they optimistic times?
Exactly now, I wouldn't say, but when you have people who resist and who react so violently to minority, it means that they have the feeling that they are losing something. Mm-hmm. Because if they weren't, they would ignore what's happening. So all the ideology that is trending in Europe, like the great replacement ideology. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Give us a small rundown.
So Renaud Camus is a French intellectual who
Yes.
that have written a book which name is The Great Replacement, and he thinks that the people from Africa, Muslim people from Africa, are willingly coming to Europe
to replace white
people.
culture.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's something that has had an effect, because it's the name of the manifesto that was drafted by the terrorists of Christchurch in New Zealand. So it's really becoming real. But at the same time, having someone thinking for real that people, brown people are replacing white people in Europe means that something is happening.
Yes.
And it's a very bourgeois man that wouldn't have nothing to do with people of color in another time. So that means that he's afraid of something that is happening.
So what do we tell them, or how can we ignore them, or how can we give them a kick in the ass? Whichever comes first.
Yeah, I don't think that we have anything to tell to them, but maybe we need to. People we have to speak to are the younger generations, and I think that what we've said about education, the younger generations, and giving them tools to express themselves and to exist in the public sphere and to frame a counter speech is something important. But it doesn't mean that I think that we are going through difficult times, and we may have something positive at the end, but we are going through very, very challenging times.
And there's actually no way back at this moment.
No,
we just have to plow on,
we'll
right?
just have to be ready and to confront that.
Yeah, you agree?
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
We're in
So,
the
so
process
when we're on the slope, we're slightly going down still, right? There's a point where we hit bottom and then go up. How far are we?
I don't like that metaphor.
You don't?
No, I
It
don't.
works for me so well in my
No.
life. But you tell me what you think.
I just don't. Yeah. I think that in between optimism and pessimism, there's possibility. So I'm a possibilist.
You're
I'm
a
looking for the
possibilist.
possibilities, and I'm working through the possibilities.
What is the
And I think
largest
that's
possibility that you see at this point, at this moment?
the largest possibility that I see at this moment in time? I see that at least the 4 largest cities of the Netherlands, they are transforming so much that if I look at my daughter who's 4, and I see her classmates, then I see that that generation is growing up in which difference is just what it is.
And they all kicked out Zwarte Piet. Those 4 cities.
And they have no problem kicking out Zwarte Piet. That's fine.
So that's possibilitism.
Yeah.
Possibilitism.
Yeah.
One last question from the room. What? Now you come? When I'm rounding up, you come? Joe. All right, let's do a few. If it's all right with you, Sophie? Yeah. You can just talk in it. Yeah.
All right. What do you think about the phenomenon of Candace Owens, this American, that yes, yeah, I can understand. I see already that the question is disturbing, but I think that's yeah. She wants just that the black matter is out. So I think that this is something that's very important. That's what's happening, because I think that this is some sort of rejection of being placed in some corner, and she wants to belong to the mass, and being maybe completely transparent.
What is the
but
question?
She goes very far. So, what do you think of this phenomenon?
Who wants to take
Candace
this one?
Owens. Candace Owens just simply shows us that amongst the Afro populations, you had many political positions, and Candace Owens is not so new. Black conservatism is as old as the emancipation struggle. So when I see her, I don't think, oh, how is this possible? No.
But she's got a voice. She's got a voice now, you know, because of social media, and so I know that it exists among black people, because there's many black people in right-wing environments. But there is a voice there that's very, very strong.
Agreed. But prior to her, there was Clarence Thomas, and some people might even say Booker T. Washington. So there's a long history of that type of position. It's a position. Therefore, I say, make no mistake to think you have a racial grouping. You do politics, and politics connects you in a certain way.
Yeah. I saw a couple of... But be quick. No long introduction to your question. Just ask the question.
Okay, no long introduction. That's really difficult. Because first thing I was thinking is that, listening to you, Franco, is that the test with the black doll and the white doll, that's racist in itself, because you ask the child to choose a bad one. So you force the child to make a decision.
Yes, so the premise of the test is wrong.
So that was thinking about what you stand for, Franco. But my critique is, this is the second time that I'm enjoying your company, is that how people react to you, how people treat you, you can't deny, ontegenzeggelijk is het woord in het Nederlands, that it has effect on who you are and how you behave and how you portray yourself. So even if I don't portray myself as a minority or someone who's not a part of the elite, I am part of the elite. I am a wealthy, independent, famous black woman, but still, when I go outside, I'm treated as a black woman and with a stempel.
Yeah, with a stamp on your forehead, yes.
So that's the question of the dad, and that's the question that we can't figure out. And that gives me a bit of unsatisfying touch when I'm listening to you.
Because you're saying that reality, day-to-day reality, is different from what you.
Yeah, it hits you in the face.
It hits you in the face.
Too hard. And just saying I'm part of the new class, I'm part of the elite, but the elite is white. So I'm with my job, I just became more white. You know, I'm diversity in the elite doesn't mean that the elite is getting diverse. It means that
the diverse people are getting elite.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
So
you're still buying into that paradigm.
Yeah.
I think she has a valid point, and I think the most valid of what I think she says is, it's okay to be, you know, brainy about this and to know which way to go politically, but the day-to-day life, it still hurts people. It still damages people. It still makes them look at themselves in weird ways. So that's something that we need to work on as well.
Well, I have never said. I think I said that racism exists.
Yes, you did.
I said the ideas of race are real. I've said that there is an administrative category of blackness that works with the police and other types of things to actually subjugate. But I've said that next to all of those, you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do? And there is, I believe, also a whole set of resources available, a whole sort of spaces that we congregate where we actually nurture ourselves continuously. I've said that if we look at, perhaps I haven't said that, but if we look at the fact that much of us are trans migrants, we are here, but we're also over there. There's all types of internet, but we're moving up and down. Those are moments that we nurture ourselves as well.
Very
so, and I've said also that someone can say something to me, but I have to respond to. And how I respond matters. And my upbringing says I have to respond based upon the long struggle that I'm part of.
Right.
So I want to recognize, indeed, all these things happen, but there's other things as well. And if we remain always in the victim order, whilst we are victimized, but we can't remain in the victim order.
Yes.
We have to be in the order of possibilities.
Yes.
But we can recognize that we're being victimized, but not in the victim order, and not constantly only naming.
So it means we're doing extra miles, but we've learned how to do extra miles.
But we have to, but that's what we've
That's
done.
Exactly, that's what we've done. Can you relate to that, Romana?
I can relate to that, and it's difficult not to feel victimized. Just man the fuck up. That's what I'm hearing you say in a certain voice. So the way they treat you, but I'm thinking about my child, and I know that he is treated differently. I know that he's treated differently, but also because he looks different. He looks not according to the norm. And I know that he enjoys being in places where people can't see him. And he's still there, so he's like a fly on the wall, like in a car. He loves being in a car, because then he's part of the society, but the society doesn't look at him like, ooh, what is this boy making strange noises? I know he enjoys being in Blijdorp, in het onderwater dingetje, hoe heet dat?
Yes.
Because it's so busy, people are looking at the fish and they're not looking at him. And they don't,
So he tries to be invisible,
yeah,
that's
and
what
they
you're
don't hear him go like,
Yes.
So I hear what you're saying, of course, but I also see how people react to my son. And I know that he doesn't understand it, but I see him getting smaller. You know?
Yeah.
So
that hurts.
So
that
that
hurts you
hurts.
as a mother. Yes, I understand. Over here, and then you, and then we really have to, because we can even talk over drinks. But yeah, if you just don't introduce it so long, we can ask more questions. Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I go straight to the question?
Go on. Yeah.
The question goes to Francio.
Oh my God.
Sorry, but I want to know or to understand better, because you said fighting the racism without choosing racial or racism. I don't really understand that. I would like you to explain that to me. And the other question goes both of you. It's being black in Europe, because most of my friends, black or mixed, when they hear the word being black in Europe, most of the time it's the feeling of to get access to the same system as everybody else. That's when you start to feel, am I really belong? Sometimes you get the question, why him? He got the access easily, why not? As you said, Diallo, that you are asked constantly where you from, even though you were born in France.
Okay, give them a chance to respond.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, shall I do the first one?
Please do. Yeah.
What I meant to say, and perhaps I didn't explain it correctly, is that we face racism in the Netherlands and in the rest of Europe and in the rest of the world. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, if we are going to be effective fighting anti-black racism, how do we do so without constructing a racial category to fight it? And I think you do so by recognizing that all categories must be political. Negritude was political in its beginning. The Nation of Islam
not
in its
again.
beginning.
You please carry on. You don't get the mic no more. Because we have to round up. And
These were
still...
political things. They sometimes went the wrong way, but they started out as political categories. And I think we have to keep it political.
So actually taking the wind out of anybody's sails by keeping it political. So I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to put it into.
Keeping it political means that once you can feel yourself part of this struggle, then you are my brother and sister.
I think
that's what keeping it political means.
Right. And no matter where you're from, no matter what
as
you
long
look like,
as we are doing this,
the same thing.
We're keeping it political.
Okay. Yeah. I think we got it now. This you're gonna have to wait. But that's what you guys all say.
I have a light bulb moment. Wait. I think, sorry. So, instead of calling it racism, call it hate. How do you fight against hate? With love. So if we all can join the movement of love, and you do it with, I see people look at me like, really, that's it? That's it. If your intention is love, then that's it.
Yes.
That's what I feel.
Well, it works in many, many instances. You get the last word. Gentlemen,
it's a long one.
Oh, it's a long one?
I want to ask it. Let me ask it. So, basically, as direct as possible, when I hear you talk, and I know you, I followed a little bit of your work, I feel there's, that you're not born here. You're not born in the Netherlands.
No.
Okay, so I feel as if being born in what I call that new continent, which is the Caribbean, which you're stating kind of also, because we're all from there and you're Caribbean, that we're in a way, let's say, privileged, and sorry to say it like that, is for a lack of words, to come back to what the sir said, as being because we've had that schooling around Europe. So because of colonization, slavery, etc. So my question directly is, what is your take on, as a Caribbean, even if you're not Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Caribbean, let's say Caribbean, identifying with Africa or not, or looking at those roots, and your take on we are coming from the Caribbean, and as formerly colonized people, that means we're still under me. Anyway, let me talk about myself. As a Curaçaoan, Netherlands Antilles, so I'm Dutch. So my representation, wherever I go, politically is Dutch, which is considered, for majority white.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that, and having kind of representation that from a people that look like yourself and me?
Well, for one thing, it gives you a really nice passport that can take you all over the world. Don't forget that. But that's not. No. But I mean, I'm trying to do the paradigm shift, right? Wonderful, because I think we should also look at the great things that have come from it, for us personally. Yes, Francio.
What is my take on this? Citizenship is something I believe people in the Netherlands Antilles fought for. They didn't get it for free. They became Dutch citizens and they fought for particular kinds of representation and particular kinds of rights. I think it's a consequence, as Basile was saying, to use citizenship as a banner to actually make sure you secure formal rights and also substantive rights. I think that in all the struggles that we're busy with, and yes, I was born in the Caribbean. I lived here most of my life, but I was born in the Caribbean indeed, so I have some grounding there. But I would say that the struggle, to me, the way I learned it, was to struggle and to maintain the norm. The norm was anti-racism, and I struggle, but I'm keeping that norm. I'm not giving in a little bit to race in no kind of way as I do that struggle. And I think you don't have to be born in the Caribbean to actually learn that. People have learned it in the US, people learned it in Brazil, they can learn it here, and I know people in England that definitely do it that way. So, and I think here in the Netherlands as well. Look at Quincy Gario. It's an example of someone who can do it that way.
Yes. Last word is for Rogaya.
I just wanted to respond to your comment about love and racism. I think that racism shouldn't be seen as something individual or as a feeling. It's something political. It has been terrorized. No, it comes from politics. It comes from domination. Black people have been created to justify slavery. It wasn't that they hate them. It was capitalism, and they needed to have a motivation to explain why human beings were treated like objects. And so it's not an individual
This is
feeling.
crucial, really.
It's something that we are shaped in because we have been raised to believe that some people are different from others, but it's not what we think about one individual. Hating someone is something different. So to me, racism it's a political ideology that needs to be deconstructed, because if you say that it's hate, you will just accuse one person and you will not try to dismantle a system.
And you will remain a victim of hatred instead
Exactly.
of politics. And being a victim of politics is easier to combat than
Yes.
being
And
a
collectively,
victim.
it's yeah.
Yes.
It's not,
So
yeah.
this is something that we can use to empower ourselves. The realization, it's not hatred, it's not personal, it's politics. This is something, the plantation attitude that's instilled in us, it taught us that it's about hate. It is not. It's about politics. The sooner we learn that, the better. So thank you all. We're going to end with my friend Jürgen. Jürgen, you're going to do another tune for us, I believe, to end this evening and give us some upliftment, man.
I think it's so complex, all the things we've heard tonight. And within this complex political idea, are people in search of answers. And I really hope we get them. And this is a song about the complexity of this identity that I also carry. And when the sun sets and falls out of heaven, I live my life like a seven. I am the green that lasts. I don't grow too fast, I grow from the past. And when the sun sets and falls out of heaven, I live my life like a seven. I am the green that lasts. I don't grow too fast, I grow from the past. Oh, rise, mutant in me, glitch in the system, anomaly. There's no right, there's love in war. So keep sleeping or dream some more. Come on, poets, pick up your swords and strike their hearts with every chord. We are heroes, born with rhyme, stuck in space, speaking signs. And when the sun sets and falls out of heaven, I live my life like a seven. I am the green that lasts. I don't grow too fast, I grow from the past. And when the sun sets and falls out of heaven, I live my life like a seven. I am the green that lasts. I don't grow too fast, I grow from the past. You're in the walls, you open doors. I see you in the windows, feel you in the floors. You're in the water, you're in my glass. Always present, shaping the past. You hold a mirror, you're in my eyes. I see you in the truth, I forgive your lies. Tear down the walls, open up the sky. I respect your reasons, this is goodbye.
And thank you to my guests for this evening, Rokhaya Diallo and Francio Guadalupe. Thank you so very much. And to you for coming out and talking with us tonight. I hope it helps. Baby steps, right? Today was a big one. Thank you. Thank you again. Time for a drink, you guys. And any other questions you can ask during the drinks.